Okay. Yes. Hello, everyone. We are live on Facebook and YouTube. Now, to get our Instagram feed going, always takes us just a moment. Okay, we are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. So welcome to the Energetic Psyche. This is Season 2, Episode 5, Staying Optimistic and Grounded in Difficult Times. Energetic Psyche is a podcast hosted by yours truly, Dr. Adrian Campbell and Dr. Cacky Mellor, where we talk about real life, challenge assumptions, and explore different ways of being in the world. Every fourth Sunday of the month, we come together with a new topic, and our hope is that we can move into conversation and answer some questions from both each other, of course, and our community. So if you're watching, whenever you come on, or if you watch this after it's been recorded, please feel free to share your thoughts, ask your questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. Okay, so once again, Dr. Cacky Mellor, my dear co-host, thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you for having me. And I am so grateful that we have this topic to discuss today. It's so poignant and timely.
Absolutely. Well, after every show, we get together and we're like, ooh, what should we talk about next month? And this was like, both of us were just like, wow, so everything's a dumpster fire. How do we address that? And how do we how are we helping ourselves deal with it? Mm-hmm. Right? What themes, for me, it's always what themes are coming up. And this was a big one, and I think in our conversation, it was what's the difference between being optimistic or delusional?
Yeah.
What's the difference in staying positive and spiritual bypassing?
Yeah.
And I think I've heard that in so many conversations I've had, that's been coming up a lot. And I think a lot of it comes down to people feeling helpless in a lot of different areas. So I think it is, like you said, it's timely. And I hope it's going to be, I know it's going to, between us, it's going to be a great conversation. But I'm really looking forward to questions that people have when it comes to these concepts. So we're going to define delusion.
Yeah.
We're going to define delusion. Also intentional avoidance of things, ignoring things, ostriching, right? Sticking your head in the ground. We're going to define optimism, positivity, and also toxic positivity, and then spiritual bypassing, and talk about how all of those go together, and let that branch out into, once you realize you can't avoid things and live healthily, how do you live in a way that honors who you are without totally losing your shit every moment of the day in the current climate in the US? So, yeah.
Yeah, let's dig in, because there is a lot to unpack here. And I'm also really excited for us to have an opportunity to certainly apply these concepts in our own lives, but also hopefully hear from our community members in how they are experiencing and witnessing these phenomena unfold in their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So should we start by, do we want to start with optimism and positivity? And then just roll from there, I guess.
Yeah, it's a good place to start.
So I'm a pretty optimistic person. I'm a pretty positive person. I get accused of that pretty regularly. And it's funny because, I have the cheerful smile. I laugh a lot. I really do. I try to go through life in a skipping manner and have a good time with it. I just went on a drive with my nephew and my dogs before this. And we're driving through the country, and the roads, some of them dip really far. And I still put my hands up and go, woo! And he's he's 14. He looks at me, he's like, right? And I'm like, you love it. It's fun. So that's how I roll. And even with everything going on, and for those of you who know me well, I've experienced some shit in my life. My life has not been easy. I still maintain like an optimistic outlook, a positive attitude, right? And I've checked myself several times, especially in the last few months. Am I being delusional? Like, am I having too much fun? I think like that's come up. Like, am I not taking what's happening serious enough right now? And I've had to pause, which is why I think we went into conversation about this. And I've been talking with so many friends because sometimes I feel bad about being happy or okay, feeling okay. I see or read some of the news going on and like hear about all the people that are being like negatively affected by the changes, right? And I think that it's important to talk about that because optimism, right, is about hopefulness and confidence in that hope. Okay. Same thing with positivity. Positivity and optimism kind of go hand in hand. It's just a different way of talking about it. Because optimism is having a positive outlook, right? Yeah. And so it really is about hope for the future, hope that things are going to change, I think is what's a really important point, because it's not that things are going to be okay. And this is, again, something I've been working on over the last month or so, because I've been in conversations with people. I mean, I'm a coach, right? And I'm the oldest of 6 kids. And I have a lot of conversations with people who are struggling. And I caught myself saying, it'll be okay. And then I'm like, I don't fucking know that. Like, I really don't. And we can get into like what the definition of okay is. And I don't know for sure that every single person will be okay. I think a lot of people are struggling, and I think people are going to get hurt and are going to suffer more before we move through this dark period, right? But what's important is that you aren't alone. None of us are alone. We're in this together. And so the hope comes from the fact that not that we're going to be okay, because I think that actually is somewhat delusional, right? Everything will be okay. It's not that everything's going to be okay because we don't know how things are going to be. But I think hope comes from knowing we're not alone and that we're going through this together, and that no matter what, people care and we're fighting for something to be better. We're fighting for change.
Yeah, in one of the attachment trainings that I have been working on, one of my mentors, Allison Hellquist, talks about the difference between reality statements and security statements. And that when we say it's going to be okay, that's a security statement. That's not based in reality. That is quite literally telling someone what they need to hear and stepping into a role of a competent protector, someone who is there to be reassuring, to be caring, to have that companionship like you're describing. And we see this a lot in parenting in particular. When a little kid comes up to you and they're just beyond inconsolable because, you know, their favorite toy just broke, our instinct is to say, it's going to be okay. And sometimes that can be invalidating to the child's experience, but oftentimes that intention is that security statement of saying, hey, we're here. We're together. You and I together right now, we are okay. And I'm curious, even just for you or anyone who's tuning in, just how is it landing in your body, me saying, hey, we're here together. Right now, you are in my care and we are going to be okay. Just how does that feel for you right now?
Feels fucking good.
Yeah.
Well, like when you called it a security statement, I was like, yeah, because those are the words that help you feel secure.
Yes.
And I mean, and I think we say these things to ourselves too. Like, I mean, I can think of some oh shit moments in my life.
Yeah.
I was like, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay.
Right.
It'll be okay. You know,
Right.
and like you just repeat that to yourself as like a little like oh shit mantra. Because, you know, sometimes we need to hear that.
Yes, absolutely. And at the end of the day, it's a ridiculous statement. Like, we don't know if it's going to be okay. Like you're saying, in fact, like we cannot know that at all. And it's also so subjective, and whose definition of okay, like setting aside that particular rabbit hole, this concept of security statements really lends itself to this conversation of the nuance between optimism and being delusional or spiritual bypassing, because there are ways that these security statements serve a really important purpose in helping us to be okay enough to keep going.
Well, you know what it makes me think of is, because I just go to like heavy trauma, right? So like when we experience heavy trauma, the brain will often dissociate us, right? And it's for our safety. Like it's done intentionally. Our biologically, our body and brain are like, nope, we're not dealing with this. And I think that it's okay statement, that security is another way of like in the moment, this is what we need to make it through, like this moment. Yes. And I think that's the key. You know, like I often tell clients of mine, like, it's okay to have a pity party and to feel sorry for yourself for a minute. But then we need to realize what's going on, find and connect to our power and move forward. Yeah. And I think like being in that space when we need that safety so that we can handle whatever is going on and process through is, I mean, we need that. But when we stay in it is when we become delusional, right? It's like when you stay dissociated, you can't live a full life. And I think when we stay in this space where, no, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. We, again, can't live a full life. At a certain point, we have to own what's going on, connect to what we have power over, and then move forward and have the courage to move away from that security, the security of that statement.
Yeah. And I think you're touching on a really important piece of where the line is between when a coping mechanism is adaptive to serve a temporary purpose, and when it becomes habitual or even pathological, where it's no longer serving us, it is controlling us, and you no longer have agency and choice, and it's a very hard pattern to break, particularly in moments of acute stress or trauma, because disassociating does feel good sometimes.
Well, and if it's worked in the past, right? Like you said, it becomes habitual. It's a maladaptive behavior.
Yeah.
Like it becomes habitual and it feels good and it serves our purpose. Then of course we're going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
Until, there's the saying like people don't change until the pain of staying the same outweighs the anticipated pain of the change.
Yes.
And so if things are like, they're not great, but that's way scarier.
Yes.
And we're going to stay in our happy space.
Yes.
and that's what happens. There has to be something worth moving away from that, worth pulling your head out of the ground.
Yes.
And looking around.
Yes. Yeah. And having the courage to risk that, it can be a big ask.
Yeah. It's reminding me of a conversation I had with someone a really long time ago. It was when I first started practicing Reiki. And I was being kind of bullish towards this person because I was like, I really want you to try Reiki. I really want you to try Reiki. And they had PTSD. And I was like, I said, it'll help you so much. Like, please let me try Reiki. And they finally were like, Adrian, I can't. And I was like, why? And they were like, because I'm afraid that if it does work, that it'll change the way I look at everything in the world.
Yes.
Like their entire belief structure.
Yes.
And it totally, like, I'm so grateful to that person to this day because it made me look at it from a completely different standpoint.
Yes.
Because sometimes finding out or learning one thing will completely shift your belief structure, which is very unsettling. I just got goosebumps. It's very unsettling. It can be earth-shattering for some people. And so pulling your head out of the ground, like, I think we talk about, wanting people to change and, you have to believe the truth or you have to see it this way. Like, we talk about all this stuff all the time without realizing, like, how big of a deal it really can be for somebody to change their mind about just one thing,
right?
Because it has an echo, right? And it affects all the different things in their lives and the way that they live their lives, relationships they have, et cetera, et cetera. So moving from that safe place, that it's going to be okay, right? The safety feeling into really the unknown.
Yeah.
And trusting each other, right? Because that's kind of what we're doing is trusting each other. Is really scary. And it takes a lot of courage.
Yeah. And just thinking about there's a quote from the medicine man, Black Elk from the Oglala Sioux, where he talks about how interconnected we all are, and that while none of us are the center of the world, we are the center of our world.
Yeah.
And we experience the world through our personal lens. And so having these moments, these reality check moments, is world destroying and world building.
Right.
So it can come with great sacrifice to be honest with ourselves about what's happening. Mm-hmm. Whether that's personally, whether that's collectively, it also can come with a lot of grief. And I hope maybe we can put a pin in that and talk about it a bit later, because it is acknowledgement that the world as we had been living it, our lived experience, our life, is no longer, and we're never going to be able to go back to it in the same way.
Right. Right. It's like, I want to say it's Sylvia Plath, but I might be wrong. But it's a woman writer, has a quote that says, I've already lost touch with so many versions of who I used to be.
Yes.
Right. And I mean, I look back, like Facebook memories pop stuff up sometimes, and I see things that I put up like 10 years ago, and I'm like, who is that person?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I can't believe I fucking said that. Like, what? So, okay. So we have a comment on Instagram I just want to address. We have two. So we'll start with one from White Hills Massage. She says, I feel like in public, people are still acting like nothing has changed, and it makes me feel alone. Yes, absolutely. And that's kind of what we're addressing. The difficult part is, and this is something we're going to I was planning on talking a little later. But how do you act when the world is what it is for Americans right now? How do you act? Right? Like, for most of us, we've never been in this type of situation before. I haven't, right? And some days I want to run around just screaming. Like, I've seen so many reels on Instagram where people are like, and then you just yell, fuck, like really loud for a really long time, I have a necklace I'm not wearing it tonight, but a cross-stitch necklace that says fuck. That a really good friend of mine made. And I've worn that a few times because I'm like, this is just what I want to do today, but I can't actually run around in society screaming it all day long. Not to mention, it's probably not in my best interest. And with all of us going through this, I feel like we're at different levels of that throughout our days, right? So I'll respond to this in just saying, I think a lot of people don't know how to act.
Yeah.
For one. For two, we can't be in this state of anger or upset 24 hours a day. It's just not healthy for us. And so I understand that it can be easy to feel alone, but I would also just invite you to realize that we don't always know what's going on in someone else's head or heart when we see them. And so even if it doesn't seem like they're acknowledging the situation, they may just not be in that moment. Okay. And then I'll also say I have clients that are in the military, active duty military. And I have clients that are women of color who have trans members working for them. And they feel surrounded by people who are not on their side.
Yeah.
And yet through conversations here and there, because they're in uniform, so they can't wear like t-shirts, pride t-shirts or whatever, right? But through little conversations here and here, they've found that they're not as isolated as they thought they were. But so many people were afraid.
Yes.
And so many people thought they were the only ones that it was accidental isolation, I guess you could say, right? So that would be my response to that comment, is just to remember that it's not always as it seems.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. And building off of that, I was listening to Pod Save America the other day, and Dan Pfeiffer said that many Americans have never, like you were saying, have never experienced a challenge to liberty in this way, have never lived under authoritarian regime. So we have limits on our imagination because we have limited life experience to draw from to recognize what's happening, because it's so far outside of our norm and our experience of what it has been to for many to be an American, and also acknowledging that oppression and systemic injustice has also always been a part of America, and there are some groups where this has historically been their lived experience. But one of the things that I think is a truth is we are all experiencing this moment of history from our unique lived experience that is shaped by our identity and all of those things. And we are in it together. We're not experiencing it in the same way. We do not have the same vulnerability as maybe the person next to us has. But none of us are alone in going through this massive historical moment.
Right.
And there are many, 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 many folks who are, as Mr. Rogers would say, like being the heroes and showing up and speaking out and tending to hope and to community and protecting their neighbors and caring for their neighbors and caring for those that are most vulnerable in our communities in really tangible, meaningful ways. And if you don't see that happening in your community, how might you be able to do that in some small way? How might you be able to be the helper?
Yeah. And on that note, like, if you are surrounded by people who are not on your team, for lack of a better term, right? Try to find new people to spend some time with.
Yeah.
I'm not saying go get a new job and move to a different state. I mean, you can do all those things if that's where you feel guided to. Like, I support you in your choices, but like, find groups of people. Because I mean, that's like when I said we don't know what people are going through. I can walk in the grocery store and everyone looks totally normal, right? Because we're not running around screaming fuck all day.
Right.
But when I connect with friends of mine, I'm like, hey, how are you? Like, the people I have in my life at this point, they're like me. And it's like, you know, it's not like, oh, I'm fine. It's like, wow, today sucked, man. Like, it is heavy and it was really hard and like blah, 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 blah. And, you know, we can have that level of conversation and then we go to the grocery store and, you know, do normal life things. So if you are finding that you can't have those conversations, that's painful, right? Because we need expression, we do. And to feel like, you know, the only one expressing that and not being met is painful. So finding groups, finding support, finding connection is really, really important in times like this, because that's what helps you stay hopeful, optimistic, right? Yes. And so it allows you to find that positivity is connection.
Yeah. I'm not remembering the name of who this quote is attributed to, but talking about they talk about activism as a chorus, and that instead of a soloist singing and they're the only one singing, and if they stop singing, the song is over. In a choir, you are a voice among many, and it is the collective's responsibility to hold that note, even when individuals in the choir pause to take a breath.
Yeah, oh my God, that's beautiful. Absolutely. Perfect image right there. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that comment and that question. I appreciate it. And we have one more. And this is from Jasmine. Reminds me of the difference between those having a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. Exactly. Right. I mean, that's like, and that's the thing. We're talking a lot about the political landscape, and it's not even just politics. This is human rights, right? Okay. Right now, but like so much of this applies to how we lead our lives generally, because it's not like all of a sudden this happened and we became different people. We were who we were. We're moving through the world in the way that we move through the world, and this happens, and we react to it based on the skills and tools that we have. And so the fixed mindset, this is the way it is, this is the way it always will be, blah, 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 right? Whereas growth is what we were talking about, allowing for something different to exist and occur. So yeah, absolutely, Jasmine, 100%.
Yeah. One other thing that's coming up for me that both relates to these different mindsets, as well as, you know, looking around and being like, man, did anyone else just see that? Like, and not really getting the recognition of someone being like, yeah, that was crazy, I saw that too. Is that I want to acknowledge the coping mechanism of cognitive dissonance. Like, there's many times we've all used this coping skill where what's going on in our world is not being reflected back to us in the outer world. And it can be really painful to hold that dissonance, to be with that rub, that bumping up against. And as a result, we can go to great lengths to do mental gymnastics in order to try and make those things match up.
Mm-hmm.
And that has a survival purpose, kind of like what we were talking about a little bit earlier, that can get us through acute, difficult situations. So I want to also honor and acknowledge that folks can be at different places
Mm-hmm.
in that process. And whether it is, an acute trauma to a family system, or to in an individual's life, in a particular friendship or romantic relationship, or if we're talking about what's going on in the United States on a larger political level, people are going to process that information about the shifts in reality at different paces.
Right.
And it might be really challenging and uncomfortable to be patient, but that's also a really important part of building community and showing up and caring for each other, is to lovingly support each other through that processing time of catching up with, oh shit, that just happened.
Right.
This is where we are now.
Mm-hmm. Well, and like the cognitive dissonance that you're speaking about, right? So I would even say, like, even before it reaches a cognitive level,
Yeah.
you can have an emotional reaction, a physical, physiological, somatic reaction to something that we don't understand. Maybe we see something and it makes us sad, or it makes us angry.
Mm-hmm.
And we've never gotten sad or angry about this thing before.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And no one around us is sad or angry. And so it's coming to terms, like you said, and like taking time. And I think a really big component to that is honoring your experience.
Yes.
Right? Your emotional, your mental, your physical experience, even if it differs from those around you.
Mm-hmm.
Being patient with what Mary Oliver calls your animal body.
Mm-hmm.
Being patient with it and not brushing it off, right? Because especially with emotions that come forward, when we brush them off, they get absorbed by the unconscious and the body. Mm-hmm. And they come back. Like, that's what a lot of my research is. And I got to tell you guys, it's not a good time when we try to ignore this stuff and we let it move into the tissues, right? So taking time with it, even when it doesn't make sense. And it goes back again to that growth mindset. And even beyond that, learning to be okay with uncertainty. Yeah. Holding space for the I don't know. Yeah. I'm not sure. I mean, this is a problem that human beings have all over the world. We love certainty. We're biologically designed to want things to be certain, to be labeled, to be known. So being able to grow past that to a point where we can accept that we don't know the answer is huge. And I mean, I think that alone would change so much of what's happening right now, because so many people feel pressured to know the truth, truth. Right. And it's like, you realize that's subjective, right? I mean, but anyway, one other thing. Whereas if we can allow for uncertainty, we allow what's there to develop and grow and come to a place where it can make sense for us, versus forcing it to be an answer.
Yeah. And feel your feelings. Like, give yourself the time
right
to feel honestly.
Yeah, be angry. If you want to yell, yell it.
Yeah. Let yourself be angry and experience that to the capacity that it feels safe for you to do so. Like, it doesn't serve you to be overwhelmed either.
There are rage rooms now. You live in a city. So I live in a much smaller community, but we have a rage room now. And I was like, really? And I read some research that the majority of people who use them are women.
Yes.
It's like 70%
Yes.
of the people who book rage rooms are women.
Yes.
And we could, that's a whole nother podcast episode right there.
Maybe we go there.
Right. But like I was getting a massage the other day. It came up during my massage. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm past the point of like just going along and I'm just angry. I'm just going to be angry. And I'm okay with being angry because what's happening is not fucking okay. And I'm not going to try and justify it or like rationalize it anymore. I'll still be loving and love people because that's who I am. But I'm also like going to let myself be angry because things are not okay. And she was like, yeah, I'm like, anger is not bad. Anger is often a sign that our boundaries or our most sacred beliefs are being trespassed, right? So anger is not bad, but just make sure that you're moving with it in a way that serves you and your community best.
Yeah. And this is also, for me, a big distinction between optimism and spiritual bypassing or delusion, because it might seem counterintuitive, but to be optimistic and to have a positive mindset, you need to feel rage when you experience rage. You need to feel grief when you are experiencing grief. True optimism needs to encompass the full spectrum of human emotions, whereas spiritual bypassing limits and narrows the emotions that are okay, quote unquote, to allow yourself to feel. You're only allowed to be happy, for example. When that's cutting us off from our truth and our human experience. So we need to feel our feelings in order to have a truly grounded, optimistic perspective. And that takes time. And there is so much that comes up when we are in really challenging situations, personally or collectively. And sometimes those experiences have a lot of urgency with them. And we feel like compelled to respond, to do something, to take action as quickly as possible. And this comes up a lot in social justice and in crisis healing work.
And social media.
And social media, yes.
We have to make a comment or
yes.
blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
Yeah.
When there is incredible power in slowing down, allowing ourselves to feel that initial round or 2 or 3 of emotions, because we can feel more than one emotion at once, folks.
You're blessed that way.
Yes. Yeah. Allow ourselves to feel that, to truly honor and be with that. And from that more integrated place of having felt the emotion, to discern next steps rather than reacting out of emotion, making intentional, productive choices about actionable steps. Like that is super, super key. And you can still act. Like, I'm not saying don't act, and I'm not saying go live in a hermit hole for a year and feel your feelings before you come out and do anything. Like, we are of the world. We still need to show up and do the meaningful work. But that work might look and feel very different if you are coming to it having spent time feeling your feelings.
Well, and I think you mentioned 2 things that are like important components to this, right, is spiritual bypassing. But then also, and you didn't name this, but I heard it, was toxic positivity.
Yes.
Which similar characteristics, but different, right? Toxic positivity in the US, especially, and I would say Western culture in general, is prevalent. And it's basically the pressure to always be positive, right? And so when we were talking about optimism and positivity versus delusion, toxic positivity is a little bit different, because in delusion, you're like, everything's fine. And you just have already decided, I'm not paying attention to any of the things that aren't going to be happy and joyful. Toxic positivity is more, you feel these feelings come up, right? And then you feel pressured to not feel those feelings. So I think there's a lot of gaslighting that takes place within that culture.
Yes.
Right? Like, I mean, you'll see something and be like, God, that's really messed up. And people are like, no way, that person deserved it. It's totally fine. Da, 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 da. And you're like, yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, okay. That's totally fine. Like, as an example, right? And that would be you allowing your feelings to be invalidated by another, not honoring your feelings, you know, and succumbing to the pressure of everything being great again.
Yeah.
Sorry, couldn't help myself. But yeah. And so the toxic positivity is something to watch out for, because that's an external pressure. And it keeps us from feeling our feelings.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, of course.
Because I think toxic positivity also, I see a lot in just conversations that I have with folks. It becomes weaponized as a way of policing other people's emotions that can be uncomfortable to witness. So certainly there's that internalized part of it, but there's also a very interpersonal way that toxic positivity is used to define for others what is acceptable or unacceptable.
Oh,
like,
right. Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, well, you know, someone comes in and they had the worst day ever, and their dog died, and they got in a car accident, and something. And it's met with, well, at least you had a pet that you loved.
Right. I was just going to say, it's the at least.
Yes.
It's the at least, or but, or, you know, yeah.
Yes. And that's very different than meeting someone in the depth of their experience and just holding them and witnessing them in that, which not everyone has the capacity to do all of the time. No one has the capacity to do that all of the time. But that's also where our responsibility to be adults and effectively communicate becomes really important, of saying, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I don't have the capacity to meet you in the emotional place that you are in the way that I want to and that you deserve. Can I call someone for you? Can I have a few minutes to collect myself before we continue this conversation? Whatever it is, but we have tools to be able to meet those moments effectively, rather than to rely on tools that can be quite passive aggressive.
So you've said this a few times, so I'm just going to throw this out there. You say we have tools, but a lot of us don't have those tools. You and I are very fortunate to spend a lot of time in circles with a lot of people who have very high levels of self-awareness, who have done a lot of work on themselves through therapy and all kinds of practices, and who have acquired these tools. Yes. And I mean, that's a big part of us doing this podcast, right? Is sharing the tools. Yeah. And like the statement you gave, like, I am not in a place, you know, emotionally, I don't have the emotional capacity to be present with you. I would say the large majority of Americans do not have that vocabulary. Like, right? I mean, for me, even 6 years ago, that would have been outside my reach, to be totally honest. And I've built and grown, I'll say, that vocabulary over time. But a huge part of what like helped me get into that is pausing and saying things that are authentic to the way that I'm feeling or being in my experience, right? So when someone says, oh gosh, my dog of 12 years just died, I think the habit of our communal culture is, oh gosh, well, at least he lived 12 years. That's great. And then we can slowly change that into, gosh, I'm really sorry your dog died. And I'm glad that you had him for 12 years. Kind of the same, little bit different, right? And then there's just, gosh, I'm really sorry that your dog died. I can't imagine what you're going through, you know? And the differences between those statements is self-awareness and pausing, you know, choosing not to say things that aren't authentic for you in that moment necessarily. And also making the moment about them and not you.
Yes.
Right? It's about their experience and what's happening right now. And so these are skills and tools that people can build over time. I mean, this is some of the stuff I work with my clients on, right? Is, you know, can I offer you another way that you could have approached this situation?
Yeah.
And then I say, let's consider saying blah, blah, blah. You know, and then as you start moving into that vocabulary, I just want to say, be gentle with yourself. It takes practice. It's not like all of a sudden you're just going to roll through the world with this like awesome, full-hearted, compassionate vocabulary. You're going to stumble, and that's okay. You know, a lot of it is humility. And like, I'm trying really hard to be a more compassionate person. And I've even said like, I'm not really sure what to say right now. And just, that's it, you know, or I can tell that you're really hurting and I'm not sure how I can support you, but I want to. And just being in that, because there's a humility there. There's that owning that you don't know what to do. But you want to help, right? So for anyone that is listening or watching and is like, well, yeah, that would be great, but you can just start there. I don't know what to say. Right? But I care about you and I can tell you're upset. That simple is a really good place to start. And then, you know, you can go from there and see what happens.
That's so beautifully said. And I appreciate you reflecting that I was saying we have tools. Because what I mean is there are tools that exist to support us in these particular challenging moments. And they are tools that take practice. And
so where can people find these tools? Because I can think of a couple places, but you know, like probably way more than I do. You are way more practiced in this than I am, for sure. I just started becoming a nice person, Cacky. No, I'm kidding. No, I've been nice at heart for a really long time. I just didn't express it well for a while.
Oh my God, I love you so much. And you are a nice person.
Well, okay, so I mostly learned my tools. I mean, 7 years of grad school didn't hurt. But like literally like going to training for psychology and like actively putting myself in other people's shoes and trying to imagine what it felt like to be that person and in that experience. That was huge for me. That completely shifted my empathetic abilities, I will say. And working in Reiki, I mean, being able to be present with somebody energetically was huge. Reading books, therapy for sure. And then just having like this, honestly, is probably one of the best. The people I surround myself with, the communities I surround myself with, and just listening. Like when I first got to Pacifica, oh my God, I remember hearing the way people talked and was like, what? Because they would talk in these like really supportive and encouraging ways. And I was just like not used to that.
Yeah.
And so I stayed silent for a while because I was like afraid to talk and say the wrong things. But the more time I spent with people that had learned these skills and tools, right? Like it helped me develop my own vocabulary, just like I think any vocabulary you're going to create.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Those are all phenomenal resources. And I really want to underscore any modality or opportunity that encourages you to engage in self-reflection and self-reflexivity is a potentially incredibly powerful tool to deepen our own self-awareness, to really recognize what is our reality? What are we experiencing? How are we showing up and speaking and taking responsibility or not for different situations? What is our role in the patterns in our life? Because with that deepened awareness, we can start to make more intentional choices. We can have agency and we can see, oh, wow, I actually am really uncomfortable when people are grieving around me. So maybe there's something there for me to explore. Maybe there's some of my own grief. Maybe
instead of grieving people are stupid.
Yeah, right.
That's what we do when we're not able to have the courage to move into that self-inquiry.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like if I'm uncomfortable being around people grieving, what is that about?
Right.
Instead of pushing it out.
Yeah. What is that about? And what support or resources do I need in order to get curious about this?
Yeah.
Because you can do a lot of self-reflection on your own. There's a reason, part of why the self-help industry is as big as it is, and there's a lot of value in a lot of the books that are out there. It's true. And sometimes we can all benefit from being in a therapeutic reflection, whether that is talk therapy, whether that is somatic therapy, whether that is a yoga practice. Like there's many different ways, 12-step programs to do this work in relationship, whether that is a formal therapeutic relationship or if that is a group healing container. You don't have to, and I would even argue it isn't always appropriate for us to try and do this work alone. That healing happens in relationship. It happens as a part of a community. So
and
those resources is important.
And you can only meet others at the depth that you've met yourself.
Yes.
So the personal work is so important.
Yeah.
So that you can move into community in that deeper way. But both are necessary. I mean, Jung talks about how we grow in relationship exponentially compared to the growth we're able to do on our own because of the reflections that occur, right?
Right.
So this kind of ties into another comment we have. She says, many people are staying home and keeping their heads in the sand. How do we inspire people to gather and talk without scaring them into paralysis or conversely, spiritual bypassing? Yeah. So I think I'll respond and then Cacky tag right in there. I think one, it's important to go back to kind of what we talked about in the beginning, that everyone's at a different place with this stuff and everybody processes differently.
Mhm.
That's another one I think is also really important. I've talked about this on a few shows, but like I'm pretty extroverted. Believe it or not, I actually am like on my Myers-Briggs, I'm really close to the middle. Like I need a lot of recovery after lots of people time. Can I present to hundreds and hundreds of people? Sure, no problem. But then like I'm gonna
You
go
do
hide.
amazing a job too.
Oh, thank you. But then I'm gonna go hide in my hotel room and like get room service. But like, yes, I'm extroverted. Yes, I'm like good being in groups. However, with things that are very important to me, that have deep heart attachments, I do not like to be in group. I do not like to be in community. Just calling, like, I use the website, is it call5.org?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I did that.
Five calls. Yeah.
Yeah, 5 calls. I called my representatives. I was like shaking. I am not kidding. I was so nervous. I could barely see straight. I was like, okay, take a breath. You're going to be fine. And they answered the phone. I'm like, oh God, it's a live person. I am not exaggerating. It was that dramatic. I have a really hard time with that. And I remember, I mean, years ago when all this stuff kind of started kicking up, I felt terrible because I have so many friends who are activists and I really wanted to be out there. Even now in my local community, a bunch of the therapists and we'll say helping community have created a community together where they're gathering like once a month to like share, because those of us that are helpers working with people, it's a lot because we're processing all our own stuff and then we're helping our clients process theirs too.
Yeah.
So in my local community, they've created this group where they're getting together and talking about like their experiences. And I think it's beautiful. I won't go because for me, it would be so overwhelming.
Yeah.
I couldn't, right? So I help and show up in different ways. Like I do stuff like this, right? Like I host this podcast, I have a blog, and I just continue to work with my clients, and I donate to groups that are important to me. And we'll talk more about like how you can connect to where you have power in this. These are just examples that I have. So like I may seem like everything is fine when I go to my yoga class and I go grocery shopping, blah, blah, blah. And if somebody was like, hey, I really want you to come to this group, da, 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 I would say no, you know, and it's not because I don't believe and I'm not aligned. It's just not how I'm in that space. However, if one of my close friends calls or texts and is like, I'm having a hard time, dude, I'm there in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
I want to talk about all of it. Right.
Yeah.
So as far as like, how do I get people out in the community and engaged? I would start with the people you know. Look for people who are trying to do the same things you are. Connect to groups that already exist. See how you can help. But as far as like dragging people out into the streets, I would be really wary of that because we can't force anyone to change and we can't make people do or things we want them to do or be like us. So that's not really the best way to find support in my mind. What do you think, Cacky?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what you're saying is meeting people where they're at and understanding that the meaningful work can take many different shapes. Just because someone's hiding in their house doesn't mean that they're not calling their representatives every day. Or doing something else that is a meaningful action within their capacity. So and this is something that can be challenging for me in moments of deep passion and emotion of I want everyone to be as mad as I am right now. But that's just as invalidating of everyone else's experience as someone who is like ostriching and not willing to understand why I am so angry. So that's something that I continue to work with in my own practice of, okay, how can I slow down, honor where I am, and meet people where they are, in a way that is compassionate and inviting. And Heather Cox Richardson has been talking about this a lot, where folks of all different backgrounds, identities, political persuasions are being really hurt by what's happening in our government right now, regardless of who they voted for or if they voted. And there is a very seductive reaction that I've witnessed of, well, you got what you voted for.
Yeah.
And I understand the sentiment behind that, the anger, the frustration, and this person is hurting, and this could be an opportunity to build a bridge.
Right.
And to better understand what is going on for this person and be a welcoming.
Let's be the kind and loving people we've been accused of being.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Where this person is really hurting. They're suffering. They are being negatively affected and they're feeling it. Not everyone has felt it in their everyday life as of this moment in the same way. So this person they're saying I'm hurting.
Yeah.
So how can we recognize that, meet that person where they are and say, I see you.
Yeah.
I see you and I'm also hurting. Those are two different steps. Those are two different steps.
Yes. Yeah.
Honor that person's experience before making it about you. But then we can actually build a real relationship or continue to deepen or repair a relationship, because a lot of relationships have been destroyed by this, right, by politics in the United States in the past 10 years. More than 10 years now, which, right? That's crazy. Time and space.
Can we be done now? Can I go home? Can we be done? But yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So I thought of a couple more like really tangible things to answer this question too.
Yeah.
Because I was, as you were talking, it was reminding me of things that like I have done, because I am more of a reserved person when it comes to this kind of stuff, because I'm kind of public on social media and in my business. So like in my daily life, it's me and my friends. That's about it. But like the fact that I called my representatives, I've never done that before. That was like a new thing for me. And I got it from you sharing it, by the way. And I was like, I'm going to check this website out. And then I was like, they even give you a script? Stop it, right? Because that takes so much of the scary out, even though I was still terrified. But like, I was talking to a friend of mine, and they were saying something about how they were unhappy about a new bill that was being put up or something. And I said, well, have you called your representatives? And they were like, no. Because I mean, let's be honest, unless you're already into activism and stuff, this kind of stuff is not a normal thing for American folks to be doing. And so I shared my experience and was like, I went to this website, you put in your address, they pull up all of your people for all the things, and then they give you their phone numbers, their emails, their fax numbers. You can fax them. And then they also like let you choose what's important to you, and they give you a script. And the person I was talking to was like, really? I'm like, it makes it really easy, even for somebody like me. And so I think sharing things like that can be a way to encourage people to step out. If you, as silly as it might seem, wear buttons, t-shirts, stickers, anything that lets people know, like, this is the team I'm on and I love everybody. I think that can be really helpful, because then people would ask you a question, right? Make pamphlets and put them places, you know? I think, and this is, again, coming from my perspective, someone who's not that fully out and open talking in public. I am quietly curious, I would say. And so if I see a pamphlet or a sticker, that encourages me to pick up the pamphlet and read, right? Or ask the person with the sticker, or, you know, I think it creates like a quiet community and helps people find each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And all of those actions are ways of signaling to other people, hey, I believe in this too, for the folks who also, and I think that's also been something that has felt different for many people, in contrast to 2016, when there, you know, day after inauguration, there was a women's march, this massive historical march, and there was a lot more like "Not My President" signs and things like that, where it was more visible, to recognize that there are other people who are feeling unseen or frustrated or not adequately represented, that you were a part of a community. So any way to do that now is a really big deal. It might seem like, oh, this is just like me wearing a pin, and like that is empty activism. It's not, especially right now, where some people doing that's a huge risk. Like, they can't actually be visible, because they could be arrested and deported, for example. So even if they can't wear that pin, knowing that there's someone else that is, and seeing that, is a way of sharing hope and tending to the seeds of hope, in ways that I really don't want us to underestimate.
Absolutely. And I want to take us from that into the spirituality behind this stuff, right? Because we've brought up spiritual bypassing a couple of times, but we haven't really dug into it. The quote that I posted with this, the marketing for this episode, was about the bird that sings for the dawn that has not risen.
Yeah.
It's faith.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going to happen. We don't, but we have to have hope. And there's this beautiful thing called faith, right? And at this point, it's in our fellow humans, humanity. And it can be really difficult to maintain, which is why the connection, the community is so important. Yeah. But I want to go even bigger than that, into the spiritual space. Because for me, in some of my most difficult times in life, my spirituality is what saved my ass, right? Yeah. Absolutely, my friends, my community helped me beyond belief, okay? But when I die, it's me and that. And so when I am really in it, my spiritual practice is what helps me attach to and hold on to that faith. Yeah, I'm not religious, but I do have like spiritual practices, you know, and I say prayers, and I actually have rosaries because I was raised Catholic and it's connected to my grandmother. There's my tears for this episode. Yeah. Anyways, but I think the spiritual component is really, really important. And I think with what's happening and how religion is being used as a weapon in so many ways in our country right now. Spirituality even can feel icky, right? Or people who are religious are really struggling with their faith. They're really struggling with their churches and which is their communities, right? So like if you're struggling with your religious community, that's your connection to God.
It's a big deal.
It's a really, really big deal. And so it can be easy, I think, for people to move into spiritual bypassing if they choose to connect to God over everything else. And it's really important that we don't do that. So I looked up the definition of spiritual bypassing because I think it's becoming one of those like buzz terms. Yeah, that we love, right? It's our favorite, like somatic.
This is our buzzword dance.
Exactly. So like spiritual bypassing. Spiritual bypassing is using spiritual ideas and or practices to avoid dealing with things. And I just put that end on there, but dealing with life essentially, right? So it makes me think of, and I've probably brought this comic up before because it's my favorite, but it's a comic and it's this guy drowning. I think it's a story, a parable that turned into
a parable. Yeah.
So a guy's drowning, right? Drowning.
Yeah, you got it.
Doctor who can't use words. Anyway, okay. So he's drowning and a helicopter shows up, right? And he's like, no. I prayed to God. God's going to save me. I'm good. Helicopter leaves. Boat shows up and he's like, no. I prayed to God. God's going to save me. Don't even worry about it. Boat leaves. And then there's one other attempt. I can't remember.
We'll say a turtle because that sounds fun.
Turtle shows up and is like, hey, I'm here to save you. I was sent to save you. And he's like, no. God's going to save me. Blah, blah, blah. And then he dies, right? And he goes to heaven and he's like, God, why did you forsake me? And God's like, dude, I sent you a helicopter, sent you a boat, sent you a turtle. And he's like, what? And it's like forgetting everything that's right in front of you and focusing on this. And I also think a huge component of that parable is giving all your power away.
Yes.
Right? Which is a huge part of spiritual bypassing.
Yes.
We are giving all our power away to some other entity that's going to save us. That's going to get us out of whatever is happening. And we don't have to do anything but sit back and let the magic happen. And the big bummer of that, I mean, there's a lot of bummers, but the big one is that as terrible things occur around the person who is spiritually bypassing, oh, it's God's will. There's nothing I can do. This is not my problem. If God wants it to be this way, it's just going to be this way. There's nothing I can do to change things, right? Because you have no power. You've given it all away. So spiritual practices as a form of support, yes, 100%. Like one of the things I always say is, especially in manifesting, we're co-creating, right? So with spirit, universe, God, excuse me, whatever you want to call it. I don't care. I'm not religious. But whatever's important to you, work with that entity, being, energy, whatever, to create beautiful, positive, and powerful change in the world.
Yeah.
Right? That's the power of spirituality.
Yeah.
But when we decide that we have no power and we're just going to give it all away and see what happens.
Yeah.
It's just sad to me, right? And you have no chance at creating any sort of meaningful change in your own personal life or in the world.
We talk a lot on this podcast about tools and practical resources, things that we can do. From a spiritual bypassing place, it's basically like taking all of those beautiful tools that all serve a different purpose at a different time and throwing them out the window and saying, someone will do this work for me.
Right. Yeah.
Or, I can't help but think of, both individually and as a species, health is been a challenge for many of us and throughout history. And we are so profoundly blessed with an abundance of resources that can support our health, whether that is allopathic, Western medical, whether that is, complementary and alternative medicine.
Mm-hmm.
If we just, for whatever rhyme or reason, decide we're only going to be open to allopathic, we're only going to be open to alternative, we're doing ourselves a huge disservice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just like a tangible example of this, because that comes up sometimes with folks in my private practice, where it's like, oh, well, this whole spectrum of tools or choices or resources is bad for whatever reason. Like, and I want to encourage us to be a lot more nuanced about this and to get curious. And you can still be discerning about what's right for you and what's not right for you. But
Right.
one, that doesn't mean that what's right for you or wrong for you is wrong for everybody else.
That's what I always tell people. Just because it's bad or just because it's not for you doesn't mean it's bad.
Right.
It's just not for you.
Right. Well, I think, we're not technically in a pandemic, but we're still in COVID era. That's very fresh still. And pandemics are not new in human history. We've had a lot of them. And that's part of where our technology, our health technology has developed, and why we have these beautiful things called vaccines.
Right. Yeah.
And so vaccines have saved generations of lives.
Mm-hmm.
If you just decide that a vaccine is a bad thing, all vaccines are bad, you're actually doing yourself a disservice of something that could be potentially life-saving for you. Or even if it's not for you, for a community member who literally can't, because they're immunocompromised, get that vaccine. So there's so many really tangible, practical examples of how we cut ourselves off from empowering possibilities and choices and resources, without even thinking of the repercussions for us or for our community. And I want to encourage people to just bring a little bit more nuance and curiosity to those kinds of choices and conversations.
Okay. Yes. You went on a little bit of a tangent for me, and so I'm catching up. But basically, thinking about how the choices that we make impact those around us.
Yeah. Well, the parable really had me thinking about how, that the person who drowned, also all of those people who tried to save them and their community and their family, like, are also affected by that choice.
I always talk about, because I work with first responders and I was in the Coast Guard. So in the Coast Guard, we used to say that idiots were job security. And when I think about first responders, I think about how many times they wouldn't have had to respond and put their lives in danger.
Yeah.
If somebody had thought about that the choices that they were making were not dangerous just for themselves, but for everyone around them and the people that would have to come and save their lives. Right. So, yeah, absolutely. We do have to care for more than ourselves. We are communal creatures. We live within community. Mm-hmm. And so the choices that we make and the things that we do impact not only us, but everyone around us. I want to go back to the spiritual component for just a minute. because we were somewhat vague in talking about like spiritual practices and things like that. And so I want to be very specific about certain things. I think one of the things that people can accuse others of doing as spiritual bypassing is prayer. And prayer is very important and does create change. Just like a Reiki practice, energy healing, sound healing, anytime we're putting out, it's a vibration that we're putting out into the world. And we all exist at a certain frequency. And when we pray, when we move through the world in a way that is loving, we raise our frequency. And if more and more people are doing that, that raises the average frequency of the world, right? So I just wanted to be really clear that even if you're sitting at home praying or meditating for an hour or two, that doesn't mean that what I'm saying is that you're spiritual bypassing. I think what you're doing is really powerful and really important, not only for you, but for the world, for your community. The big thing we have to pay attention to is that you're not doing it to avoid what's happening. And I think that really is like the key to this whole conversation is being optimistic while realizing things are shit.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's like it brings me back to the yin yang sign, the dark and the light. And there is some darkness in the light and some lightness in the dark.
Yes.
And everything is whole. We are a whole existence, a whole person, a whole being, a whole community. There is no good without the bad. There is no dark without the light. I'm reading a beautiful book right now. I can't remember the author. Let's see here, but it's Jung and Yoga. It's all about Jung and yoga, Jungian theory and yoga. But they talk about in the book, surprisingly, that Adam, if we go back to the creation myth, right? Christian creation myth, Adam didn't know that there was light until there was dark. So we don't have the opportunity to be optimistic or positive, really, truly, until the opposite exists. Right? Until there is negativity, until there is hopelessness, we don't have the opportunity to be hopeful. So I think it is about being able to carry the opposites.
Yeah.
Right? The tension between the opposites is where we find the best results.
Very Jungian.
Yeah, of course. So I just wanted to be really, really clear on that. All of these practices are beautiful. Optimism is beautiful. The way you stay out of delusion, the way you stay out of bypassing is don't avoid the darkness. Don't avoid the shit, right? You can have a positive mindset and also see what's happening.
Yeah. I think another kind of point of difference between optimism and delusion or spiritual bypass that's coming up for me as you're offering that is, from my perspective, optimism is something that's going to bring you more into life, more into reality, into relationship connection with what's around you. And spiritual bypassing is removing yourself and putting further distance, getting further away from life, from really living. So that's another distinction that I'm seeing, that might be supportive if you're trying to ask yourself, am I spiritually bypassing? Am I being optimistic? Are you feeling like you are moving further into life? And that doesn't mean that it's going to be fun or comfortable. Or are you feeling like you're becoming further detached from the world?
Yep. And An easy way to check in with this stuff, if you are into energy and chakras. Okay, so there's 7 major chakras. We have the root, which is the base of the tailbone, and they go all the way up to the crown of the head. Number 7 is up here. Each of the 7 major chakras are energy centers in our body that process different types of energies, emotions, allow us to work with different skill sets and tools based on the health of those energy centers and what's going on with them, if they're functional or dysfunctional, et cetera, et cetera. The lower half is all about material and material existence in this world. Okay. The realistic reality nitty gritties. It can be easy to be in that space and only see what's right in front of you.
Yeah.
Right. The upper half is all ethereal, imaginative, spiritual, upper enlightenment stuff. Okay. So when we spiritually bypass, this is where we live, in our top 3 chakras, because we don't want to deal with any of this nasty real life shit down here. And we essentially truncate our bodies, right? And we just cut ourselves off. I've had clients come in or go into their energy and there's like nothing from the heart down, just quiet. And up here, they're like, la, like all bright and shiny. And they're having great dreams and they're meditating all the time, but they're completely ungrounded, right? So I always say when I teach about the chakra system, the connecting chakra is the heart, which is love. That's what brings our upper half and our bottom half together. Okay. Yeah. And in order to be healthy and whole, we need all 7 chakras. We need the happy, hippie, imaginative stuff, and we need the hippie toes in the dirt stuff, right? Yeah. And when we have all of those centered, flowing the way that they need to be, then we are fully present and able to create serious change in our lives. So get your chakras checked out, man. Like, there's a really easy way to see, I've also had clients come in where the top's disconnected.
Yeah.
And they in that space, they can often be depressed, feel stuck, not know where to go next, feeling helpless. Yeah. Or they're very angry and aggressive. They're in this kind of like spinny state because they can't see the future. They can't connect with anything bigger than them. Right. So if this interests you, I have a book online. It's called Explore Your Chakra System. It's available on Amazon. But you can also just Google the chakra system and just for each one, ask yourself, how is this resonating with me? Am I feeling these things? Am I acknowledging these things in my life? And if any of them feel off or weird, right? Spend some time with those thoughts, emotions, and energies. Yeah. Because no one is more important than the other. Right. It's going back to that balance, right? And just making sure that we're 100% present with our entire energetic system. The sneezies.
Yes, I got the sneezies.
Oh my gosh. All right. So hang on one sec. We have 30 minutes left for anyone that's watching us live. And thank you so much for being present. We have quite a few people with us tonight. And I really appreciate your guys' presence. I appreciate your questions and your comments. So we got 30 minutes left. Please, anything else you want to make sure that we cover, ask, share a thought. We'll share it out with the world. Just throwing that out there. And before we move into like connecting to where we have power, right? But Cacky, what were you going to say?
Yeah. One in particular, I'd be curious for folks who are tuned in. We've been talking a lot about tools and resources. I'd love to hear from other folks. Like, what are your practices? What do you do to help yourself to stay engaged and be grounded and be optimistic? And please, we want to share and uplift that. This is another resource gathering tool that we can do as being a part of a community here. Also, expanding on the spiritual piece.
Mm-hmm.
One of my very favorite books is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And for many years, it was a book that I would read at least once a year. And I've fallen out of practice the last couple of years. But I have a really poignant relationship with that book because it has consistently, every time I read it, put things personally and collectively in a different perspective. And for folks who aren't familiar with the book, Viktor Frankl was a psychotherapist, and he was Jewish, and he was imprisoned in a death camp during World War II by the Nazis.
He didn't become a psychotherapist though until afterwards.
Right. Yeah, okay. Yes, thank you for clarifying. But he was studying before because he was put in the position of being on hospital experimental units because of his medical background. So in the book, he wrote this book, the bulk of it, in 6 days after that camp was liberated. And he wrote, the first half of the book is a lot about his experience in the death camp and what he noticed about the folks who survived.
Right.
And what he really holds up is that the folks who found meaning in their life, even in a death camp,
I think you paused. Dr. Cacky, you're frozen on my screen. Okay, I'm going to talk until she comes back. But the book she's discussing, Man's Search for Meaning. Oh, there she is. She's back. Okay.
Sorry.
So people who found meaning, even in a death camp, that's
yes, yes, were much more likely to survive. That it quite literally gave them the will to live. And it didn't matter if it was meaning that they found in a like structured religious a context. It could be that they found meaning in watching the weed grow up in the concrete. Whatever it was that on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis gave them meaning, that they could tend to that meaning, was an incredibly powerful source of hope and resilience and life-sustaining. That when folks lost that sense of meaning or purpose, they very quickly faded away or quite literally died. So I encourage folks, if you haven't read the book, to read it. It's not necessarily an easy read, but it is a very poignant and profound one. And it has some really tangible examples and tools for exactly what we're talking about this difference between grounded spiritualism or optimism and spiritual bypassing or being delusional. So that's a big resource for me.
It's an excellent. I mean, I think it was part of our curriculum at Pacifica.
Not in my class.
No? Okay, so then maybe it was my undergrad, but I remember being assigned it in school, and I had actually already read it, and so I remember being like, "Nice, good choices." And Maura, yeah, she also commented, "Such an excellent book, profound words." Absolutely, I've never met anyone that read the book and was like, "Meh." Like,
No.
and it's, you said it's not an easy read, but it's not a thick book, and it's more that, at least I think this is what you're saying, is there's challenging topics in it.
Yes, it's not a dense text. It's not like an academic text. It's an emotionally intense read.
I mean, he's in a Nazi death camp.
Yeah.
So some shit goes down. And it's very emotional.
Yes.
But yes, phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have a few comments, and then let's move into connecting to where we have power to create change.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, so White Hills Massage, which is it Willow?
Whitney.
Whitney. Okay. Thanks, Whitney. Totally inspired by all your suggestions and the reminder that prayer is practical. Yeah, absolutely. And then Elliot says, I like to walk in nature, but I also like to hear success stories of people who I view having a way harder time than me making it through tough times. I try to walk a mile in someone else's shoes so I can experience their situation. Absolutely. Like I think I shared this last time. I had someone, we talked about how I used to be a Republican, and how growing my empathy and putting myself in other people's shoes is what completely changed the way that I interact and move in the community and all of that. So absolutely 100% agree. And thank you for sharing that. And then I keep wanting to call her Willow, and I know that's not her name.
Whitney.
Thank you. Whitney, I think if we ever meet, that's going to be your nickname, and I hope you appreciate it. So Whitney says, yes, Dr. Mellor, I'm needing to remind myself of the roles I play to stay focused on how I can practically make a difference. Mom, friend, and nurse. Absolutely. And Jasmine, my gratitude practice is imperative for me. Yes, to gratitude. And there's so many ways to practice that, right? But gratitude, even a couple seconds of gratitude can be life-changing. And then my new friend Willow says journaling, breaking, yoga, meditating. Beautiful. Absolutely. And so going into connecting to where we have power, right? All of those things that she just mentioned really connect to like self-care, and more than self-care, I want to call it well-being. Just taking care of our well-being, because again, self-care is kind of the self-care, right? Theme word, buzzword. But it's just taking care of your well-being, which is really important. And gratitude practice, journaling, taking breaks, meditation, yoga. These are all, I think, really often publicized ways to do that. And there's really simple ways, simpler even ways that I would share, like drinking water.
Yes.
Just drinking water, making sure you're getting water, sleep, right? These are like the basics. And I think sometimes, especially when life is hard, we can actually like get into these cycles where we guilt ourselves or start feeling crappy because we're not taking care of ourselves enough. And it's like, if you start to feel overwhelmed, take it back to step one. Breathe. Like, breathe. And don't worry about like box breathing and alternate nostril breathing or any of this complicated stuff. The easiest thing you can do is just let your exhale be a little bit longer than your inhale, right? Or just make sure you're breathing. We hold our breath all the time. It's wild. So if you can remember a couple times a day to be like, oh, how's my breath? Am I breathing? Okay, breathing. Cool. Like, That's amazing.
Yeah.
Drink water, feed yourself, which, believe it or not, is so hard for us to do. It's one of the things I work with every single one of my clients, not even kidding, including myself. How much did I feed myself today?
Yeah.
Right? Because life is complicated. I mean,
Yes.
most of us are running 100 miles an hour.
Yes.
So feed yourself, drink water, breathe, and sleep. Like those 4 things. And that's 4 things. That's like a lot, right?
Mm.
But if you can do that, you're off to a great start. And then you can add all the other stuff that is going to support you. But if things are tough, you know, like give yourself a break and just concentrate on those 4 things is what I would say.
I have a couple of things that I would add to that, like basic list. Finding small things, the smaller the better, that bring you joy.
Yeah.
Joy is radical. Joy is life affirming. Joy is an act of resilience and resistance. So if there is any small little thing, like if you find joy, Elliot was saying, in going on walks in nature, then give that to yourself. Like if you find joy in creating art or writing poetry or dancing or going to protest, whatever it is, whatever brings you joy, now is the time that we really need to be intentional about tending to that and cultivating that. That is a part of living, and that's part of meaning. That's part of what gives us meaning. If we surrender that joy, then whatever challenge we are facing, it's already defeating us in a really deep way.
Yep. Absolutely.
And I want to really caution against giving away our joy. It might seem silly. It might seem like there's too many serious things that are going on, but we can't let that go. Like that is such a fundamental reason to keep going.
Well, and it's one for the other, right?
Yeah.
So if there is a whole bunch of serious, we need a whole bunch of silly too.
Mm-hmm.
We need to find that balance. It's like the Instagram post I shared with you
before
you came on.
Yeah.
So it's a Instagram account called the Shabby Creek Cottage. I just want to give her credit. But she had a post and it says, if the world feels too heavy, that means it's time to lighten up. Because your joy is not a luxury, it's a rebellion.
Yes.
Right? And I saw this and I saved it because I was like, this is perfect for our topic. Because people can accuse others, right? Especially at this moment. If they're out there having fun and being silly and playing, well, you're not taking this serious enough. Don't you know how messed up everything is? And you're just delusional and blah, 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 blah. No, you can know how serious everything is and you can be present with that. And like I did today, we went up and down the hills and I was in a roller coaster in my car.
Right.
Because it's fun and it makes me laugh, you know, and we need that. It's so important. In her post, she also says, if the world feels too heavy, that's your cue to lighten up. Not by ignoring what's happening, but by remembering you weren't built to carry it all. Yeah. So bring some light back into your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it, is that we feel like we're carrying everything and we're not. We have a piece, right? And when we share our troubles with our community, we are carrying a piece. We're not carrying it all.
Yeah. And that's so in alignment with some of what Joanna Macy talks about in the book Radical Hope. of tending to joy, which is tending to life. And also this piece of community. That was the other like fundamental ingredient that I really wanted to make explicit is humans are relational. We talk about this like a broken record on this podcast.
Because it's serious, you guys.
It's a big deal. It's a big deal.
And in America, we're so hyper individualistic.
Yes.
We have to talk about it all the time because we're fighting culture.
Yes.
We're fighting unconscious programming.
Yes.
We need each other.
We need each other. We really, really, really do. And that is such a radical thing to do, to show up and to be in relationship and to be a part of a community and to tend to community, to build community, to welcome and invite new people into community. So, and again, that can look a lot of different ways. It's not going to look the same for an extrovert as an introvert, as like all of these other different things. But how can you, it might be on a daily, a weekly, a bi-weekly basis, but foster greater connection. Mm-hmm. Allow yourself to be held and to hold others. That might be physically hugging someone, but it might be what you were saying, like your friend calling you up and being like, hey, shit's hitting the fan. Can we talk?
Because community doesn't mean a group.
Right.
Like, I want to be really clear. It can, right? But being in community doesn't mean you have to go spend time with large groups of people. I would like have anxiety attacks. But community means creating connections with others, whether it's making a phone call, having a lunch date, having your friend come over and sit on the couch while you cry together. I mean, would it go to a rage room together? Whatever, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be a group. Community can be a one-on-one connection.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think connection is really the key word, is what is going to help you to feel connected, because that'll inform what kind of connection you want to have. Like, is it that one-on-one? Is it, maybe you don't even want to connect with humans right now. Maybe it's connecting with your dog or your cat or with nature or with gardening. So really, slowing down, getting curious, listening to what your system is asking for and needing in that moment, and meeting yourself there. Because all of this has a ripple effect.
Right.
And I am often thinking about Thich Nhat Hanh, Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, and his concept of interbeing, that I exist because everything else exists. Mm-hmm. That I am entirely made up of components that are not Cacky. Right. And everything that I do ripples out and affects all of that. And anything that anything else does ripples out and affects me. So, yes, praying is a part of that ripple effect. Yes, making sure that you drink water and are hydrated is part of that ripple effect.
Right.
Listening to your friend or asking for someone to listen to you is a part of that ripple effect. Even, going to protests or using 5calls.org is a part of that ripple effect. And it can all feel really, really big. And I'm also like, not just talking about collectively, our personal lives can feel really, really big and unmanageable. One of the ways that we can find our power is by tending to what is within our control and trusting that that will ripple out. Mm-hmm. So looking around you and checking in with yourself, what's realistic, what's real for you in this moment? What is your energy level? Do you need to tend to yourself, put your oxygen mask on before helping others or showing up for the collective? And knowing that any action that you take to support yourself, to support another person, to support a community is deeply meaningful. And
Absolutely.
nothing is too small.
Right. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So there's one more place I wanted to touch on before we end tonight, because I think it's really important. We've already talked about connecting to where we have power to create change in politics quite a bit, right? So I wanted to talk about self-care, wellness, politics, but then also relationships. Because I feel like this is, well, I know this is another area that people are struggling right now. This is one of the first times in my life I've felt I needed to take sides. And it's been very challenging because I have friends and family members all over the spectrum when it comes to thoughts and beliefs. But I have chosen where I am. And so when it comes to relationships, you know, I know people who were married or in significant relationships who didn't share who they voted with the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's true, then what else is not being discussed or shared? How different are their beliefs? And there's no judgment here. I just also want to put that out. No judgment, okay? It's more just creating a level of awareness. So if you're in that position, you're not alone. There's probably millions of people in the same position. So when it comes to relationships, I think what's really important is applying that same level of awareness we've been talking about all night. Being careful that we aren't moving into a state of delusion in our relationship, because I've been there, guys. I'm just throwing it out there. Intentionally avoiding parts of the relationship that are uncomfortable or in dissonance with our own existence. Not saying that, not looking at your relationship necessarily as bad or good, right? Going back to that again, but is this relationship serving me? And to put it on a spectrum, how is this relationship serving me? How is this relationship not serving me, right? And so just really creating awareness there. The other thing I think we can fall into is not knowing what we actually want or need in a relationship. So whatever we have is always good enough, even though it might feel weird or off.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about just romantic. I'm talking about all relationships. So friendships, familial relationships, colleagues, etc., work relationships, anyone you're in relationship with, okay? Including yourself. I'll throw that little booger in there too. But really just asking, what do you want from this relationship? Because if you don't know, you can have no real expectations from it. Being disappointed or hurt from it doesn't really carry the same level of weight if you didn't identify that in the beginning, right? So what do you want from the relationship? How can you ask for that? Because that's the second step, right? So awareness, what do I need? Second step is, how do you get that? Which can be really scary. And so that's those tools we were talking about earlier, the way we use our vocabulary and our sentences, right? Our words good. Asking for what you need, and then being prepared to deal with what happens next. So boundaries. So when you identify what you need, maybe even before you ask, decide what you're going to be okay with and create those boundaries. And go from there. But I think that when it comes to relationships, those are the most important things with what's going on right now, to help you move through, because that's probably the area that I see and experience intentional avoidance happening the most. And I say intentional avoidance as like, oh, they didn't say it to me, right? Or yeah, so-and-so said they said that, but I didn't see the post. So it's, whatever. Because we're too worried about damaging or ending that relationship. So
yeah.
So I just wanted to make sure to put that out there.
Yeah, thank you for naming that. And a few pieces to add to that. I also think it's important to remember that sharing your needs is a request. Just because you say, I need you to do this, doesn't mean the person's going to meet that need. Doesn't mean that they are able to meet that need. That's where the boundaries comes in. Well,
that's also not your need. So when I say what your needs are, is I need to live in a home that's like this. I need to have these types of experience. I need to have conversations that are like X, Y, and Z. Not I need you to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
There's a difference there.
Yeah, it's a really important difference. And oftentimes people are like, oh, I know exactly what I need. I just need you to change everything about who you are, and this relationship will be great. No, that's not what we're talking about. And it's important to also remember we're all on our own healing paths. We're all on our own journeys. And I'm responsible for my journey, and I can be of support and companion people on theirs. But it is not appropriate for me to dictate what their journey needs in that moment, or to try and force them to do something they're not ready for, or to control. So it's very important to honor that people might, again, they might have their own timeline and process and need to do their own work, and honoring that. So I really appreciate you saying that, and also recognizing that different relationships serve different purposes. In a lot of 12-step groups, they say, don't go to the hardware store for milk. If you know that this particular person is not going to meet you with compassion for this particular challenge, don't expect them to be compassionate. Go to other relationships where you are going to be able to get that compassionate response that you need. So it does take a level of discernment and loving detachment. But that's another part of this grounded optimism.
Grounded optimism. That's the first time we've used that phrase, and I like it. Putting a pin in it. Okay, guys, we are pretty much at time. I just want to say thank you so much to everyone that joined us. I really appreciated your comments, your questions. It helps us feel less alone in the world when you guys interact with us, and it helps us share things that are more poignant, right? And give you exactly, like, not exactly, but give you more of what you're looking for. So that being said, if there's any topic that you would like us to address in the next few months, we do this once a month, fourth Sunday of every month. Let us know, right? And we will consider it and throw it into the pot. But we really would and do love to hear from you. So thank you so much for being present. Thank you for your participation. And I think we'll just each give one last tidbit, and then we'll sign off. Yeah? Okay. I'll go first. So it's really what I've been talking about this entire time. We don't know that things are going to be okay. And all I can say is that you're not alone, and that we're all here with you. There are millions of people, millions, probably billions around the world, right? billions of people who support you and care about you and are trying to help. There is hope. If you're feeling heavy, if you're feeling weighed down, go do something silly. Dance around with your dog, play in the water, do some finger painting, add some lightness to your life because you deserve it. You deserve that level of kindness, and you deserve to feel joy and love in spite of all the shit, right? Because it's still there. So create some balance in your life. And yeah, we'll get through this.
Yeah, thank you for that. Oh, folks, anyone who's hearing this message, it's my turn to get emotional. I want you to hear me when I say that we need you here. So please keep breathing. Please keep showing up in whatever ways that you can for yourself and for your community, and know that that is a radical act of love and of life. Just keep living, keep breathing, keep being the embodiment of love that I know that you are. And thank you, everyone, for being here and being a part of our community. It really means a lot.
Yes. We love you. All right. Have a good rest of your week, month. We will see you next month, 4th Sunday.
Woohoo!
Bye.